street. I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
I'm really confused. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence, and he was dead when she hit the ground. I didn't see any cars. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence.
911, what are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was? Was it a person or an animal or?
I can't tell. All I know is that my sensor light came on, and I just happened to glimpse and see this thing running across the yard. A good-sized man or something. It looks like a man. I don't know what it was. Just that it ran across the yard.
Okay.
I don't know what it was. Whatever it is, it's running. I couldn't catch it if I was going to chase it. But whatever it was standing up. I'm out here looking through the window now, and I don't see anything. I don't want to go outside. You better.
Sure.
See ya.
Hello?
Get somebody out here. 9, I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
My God, he's big.
Okay, what's he doing in your yard?
He's looking at me.
Oh.
Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 1 of Out There, the show in which we will be discussing anything and everything unknown in America. We'll be talking about cryptids, urban legends, the paranormal, strange phenomenon, all of it. Now, America's folklore is unique in that it's a collection of stories from people of all walks of life. Whether it be the stories of the indigenous people who lived here or those who arrived much later, their stories still live on today. For each episode, we'll be diving into a specific cryptid or something else relevant to the show, any stories involving it, theories on the existence, and just for fun, whether I think it's real or not. Now, ideally, if anyone has any stories they'd like to share about personal encounters, I'd love to read them. Please feel free to reach out to my email if you want to submit something. The email is jruckman27@my.whitworth.edu. That's jruckman27@my.whitworth.edu. If you didn't catch that, the email is also written on the posters for the show across campus. Alternatively, you can also reach out on Instagram. I'm going to be making an account for the show pretty soon. Anyways, point being, please feel free to send in any submissions, stories, comments, anything like that. I'd love to do a mail time segment on this show. Alright, so now that we got that out of the way, I think we should dive into our first episode's subject of discussion. Tonight we're going to be talking about probably one of, if not the most famous cryptid in the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be talking about the Sasquatch, aka Bigfoot. Alright, so for starters, let's get some basic information on the Sasquatch. We're going to be using this following book as the main source, The United States of Cryptids, A Tour of American Myths by J.W. Ocker. Shout out to my girlfriend for getting me this book, by the way. Basically, this book covers all the different cryptids per region, and we're going to be doing something similar with this show. We're going to be starting on the West Coast, because that's where I'm currently located, then we're going to work our way all around the country. Now, that being said, this episode is going to be a bit different simply because Bigfoot is just so well known and so iconic that pretty much every state in the country has some sort of variation on him. Now, when I say Sasquatch or Bigfoot, you probably imagine some guy in a tinfoil hat hiking around the woods with a magnifying glass trying to find the creature, or one of those really entertaining but also, I hate to say this, really staged seeming shows like Finding Bigfoot or Mountain Monsters on Animal Planet or Discovery Channel. Love the shows. They're very entertaining, don't get me wrong. They're also just so wildly outlandish, and that's part of the entertainment factor. Anyways, you may think of those shows when you hear of Bigfoot, you may think of those kinds of people. Maybe you're thinking of the infamous Patterson-Gimlin film. Now, if you actually have a life, you probably have no idea what the Patterson-Gimlin film is. It's that one really famous video of Bigfoot walking along a tree line. The Sasquatch in that video is all black, and it turns its head to look at the camera for a second before continuing to walk off. If you Google Bigfoot, it's the second image that pops up. It's pretty well known, but a lot of people don't know what it's actually called, so I figured I'd shed some light on that for the uninitiated. Anyway, the point is that we associate Bigfoot with the post-colonial time in America, but In reality, the story of giant humanoids covered in hair living in the forest have been told by the various native tribes that have resided here for generations. In Tulare, California, I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm like 90% sure that's how you pronounce it. In Tulare, California, there's a glyph made by the Yokut tribe featuring a hairy man interacting with humans. According to that tribe, the hairy man ate animals that might harm people. The Chinook people of the Pacific Northwest tell stories of the Skookums. If I mispronounce anything, by the way, I sincerely apologize. A tribe of cannibalistic wild men living within Mount St. Helens. Even the word Sasquatch comes from the Saskatchewan Mountain. Now, this mountain is where the Sasquatch come to gather, according to the Chehalis people. There's a lot of words from indigenous languages that are going to be used, so I'm going to try my best to pronounce them as correctly as possible, but if I get anything wrong, I sincerely apologize, and I mean no disrespect from it. I'm trying to find every pronunciation before I say it so I can make sure that I get it right, but if I make a mistake, I apologize. But anyways, I digress. Those are just some examples of how extensive the lore for this creature goes, and how far back the history is with human encounters. Now, with that in mind, let's take a look at how this legend carried over into some other states and kicked off a phenomenon of nationwide sightings. So, first of all, we're going to talk about the Washington Bigfoot. I figured we should start with the most geographically relevant one first. It only feels appropriate. So, Bigfoot is a huge cultural icon of Washington. There's more Bigfoot sightings here than any other state. The biggest Bigfoot statue is located in Washington. That's a tongue twister. The biggest Bigfoot statue is located in Washington. The biggest Bigfoot statue is located in Washington. Anyways, if you go to any gift shop in Seattle, there will be at least one piece of merchandise featuring Bigfoot on it. You'll encounter at least one person in a 4Runner or Honda Ridgeline with a Bigfoot sticker. And let's not forget that it's a misdemeanor to kill Bigfoot in Washington state, punishable by up to $10,000 in fines or 5 years in prison. Now, although Bigfoot has basically become one of Washington's mascots, not all of the stories about him in the state are very friendly. We're going to be telling the story about a group of 5 prospectors that ran into not one, but a whole group of Sasquatches, and how that encounter led to that location being now known as the Ape Canyon. In 1924, Fred Beck, Gabe Lefevre, John Peterson, as well as Marion and Roy Smith, had built a cabin in the canyon located on the southeast side of Mount St. Helens. They, like many other Americans around that time frame, had ventured out into the frontier in search of gold. They had set up a small cabin to act as a temporary base camp while they mined in the hills. One day, while Fred and another member of the group, it was never specified who it was, were returning from the woods with water, they encountered a lone humanoid creature stalking them in the distant trees. It was around 7 feet tall and looked to be covered in dark black hair. Upon seeing the creature, both Fred and his companion reached for their rifles and opened fire on him. The creature fled through the forest as the 2 men continued firing shots. Later that night, the group cowered in fear inside of their cabin as boulders and rocks came crashing down onto the roof. According to Beck, the Sasquatch and his friends had come back for revenge. Some accounts say that the Sasquatches tore the roof off of a house and threw rocks that knocked Beck unconscious. However, according to him, that was a fabricated element that a lot of newspapers added when reporting the story. The Sasquatches did end up on the roof, however, and the group started opening fire on the ceiling as soon as they heard the footsteps. They also disassembled a bed and used it to barricade the door shut. We're doing it Rainbow Six Siege style over there, I guess. Now, according to Fred, a Sasquatch never threw a rock at his head through the roof. However, apparently it did reach through a gap in the wall and try to grab an axe. I want you to visualize Bigfoot wielding an axe for a second, and then get rid of that mental image because it unfortunately did not come to reality. Fred wedged the axe against the wall in a way that made it impossible to remove from the angle that the Sasquatch's arm was at, and a few more shots from rifles and such that they had in the cabin were fired at it before it retreated. Now, eventually, around the early hours of the morning, the Sasquatches stopped throwing rocks and trying to break in and just stood at the edge of the canyon looking at them. Realizing that their adversaries were unarmed, Fred fired 3 shots at one of the creatures, causing it to topple into the canyon. The canyon where this battle took place is now referred to as the Ape Canyon. Now, you're probably thinking at least one of the 2 things right now. Why were they carrying rifles to go get water? And why was their first reaction to Bigfoot to just start shooting at him? You see, the group was already a bit on edge by that point because this wasn't their first supernatural encounter. In Fred Beck's own personal account titled, "I Fought the 8 Men of Mount St. Helens," can we take a second to admire how cool that title is, by the way? I fought the 8 Men of Mount St. Helens. Anyways, Fred mentions that although prior to the encounter they hadn't physically seen anything, they had heard whistling coming from the tree line that would be responded to by whistling from a ridge several miles away. They would also hear a loud booming sound as if something was beating its chest like a gorilla. By the time they had to resupply on water, they were already pretty paranoid about what lived in the forest. Now, some things to keep in mind about this account. First of all, the book was actually written 40 years after the actual occurrence, and by that point, Bigfoot was pretty well known and a popular topic of discussion. Second of all, there's sections in the book where he talks about how the group was apparently visited by spirits of Native Americans that just kind of popped up while they walked through the forest and either offered them guidance or gave warnings. I don't want to completely discredit this, but I kind of feel like adding a ghost element into the Bigfoot story kind of makes it seem a bit less credible. However, Fred Beck actually does manage to kind of tie it all together. We will explain that more later. For now, we're going to move on to the Bat Squatch. What is the Bat Squatch, I hear you ask? Well, Bat Squatch is another Washington cryptid. I thought it was Bigfoot with wings when I first read about it, but apparently it's just a giant bat-like humanoid. I guess you could technically look at it like Bigfoot with wings, but the descriptions I've read on it make it seem more like Man-Bat from the Arkham games. Now, in April of 1994, Brian Canfield was driving to Camp 1, located at the foot of Mount Rainier. Canfield's truck broke down in the middle of a wooded road at around 9:30 p.m. As he began to get out of his truck, a large creature with bat-like wings, a wolf-like face, yellow eyes, and dark blue fur landed in front of his headlights. It then flew off, leaving a very terrified Brian to go back to working on his truck. There isn't a whole lot about Bat Squatch. The story I just told is the only really notable sighting, but I figured he should get a mention since he's also a PNW cryptid. Now, while Bigfoot is a huge cultural icon in Washington, I will admit we can't take all the credit for him. California is really where the Sasquatch craze kicked off. You see, in 1958, the Humboldt Times, located in Eureka, California, published an article about a group of loggers who had noticed large footprints around their worksite. The workers began referring to this perpetrator as Bigfoot, and the name stuck since then. In 1967, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin traveled to Bluff Creek to try to find the creature that had been written about in the papers almost a decade ago. This resulted in the infamous Patterson-Gimlin film we talked about earlier. Now, the actual film is very shaky and shot on 16mm film. However, there is an upscaled version of it on YouTube. There's several upscaled versions of it on YouTube, actually. And I have my thoughts and opinions about the Patterson-Gimlin film. We'll also discuss that later. Now, moving on to the East Coast, the Whitehall Bigfoot. Now, the Ape Canyon story sounds a bit like an action movie almost, but the Whitehall story is just plain scary. There is very little action in it. So, on the evening of August 24th, 1976, Paul Goslin and Martin Paddock were on their way to do some fishing just outside of town. As they drove through the rural roads, they began to hear a squealing, shrieking sound, almost like a woman screaming. They grabbed their shotguns and turned the truck around towards the source of the noise. The headlights shone on a 7-foot-tall creature with red eyes and dark fur. The creature charged at them, and the 2 teenagers sped off. When driving back to try to spot the creature again, they did, and went back into town to form a search party. Now, some members of the party, including police officers, say they saw the creature running across a meadow in the distance. The next day, Brian Goslin, Paul's older brother, went back to the road to try to catch the creature again. He ran into the creature and shined his flashlight on its face. The Sasquatch screamed, shielded its face with its hands, and ran off. Now, the idea of encountering something while driving in a rural area at night is one that really gets to me in terms of being scary. There's this video on YouTube of a man in Saudi Arabia, I believe, and he's driving on the dirt road, and he runs into this woman wearing a white gown. I think in the title they call her a witch, and her hair is all matted, and she looks like the girl from The Ring almost. Now, if I saw this on the street on Halloween, or honestly any normal night, I wouldn't be scared. Because if you look at the video, you can kind of tell that the quote-unquote witch he encounters is obviously just a guy wearing his grandma's old gown and a wig. But in that context and where it is, it's terrifying. Because if I saw that in the middle of a forest road in the middle of the night, I would just be petrified. The guy in the video is horrified too. He's screaming and reversing the car and praying. So in that same sense, I think the visual image of just driving through a rural road at night and then encountering a giant ape in the middle of the road with no lighting except your headlights, that mental image is going to haunt my nightmares for a while. Now, a lot of Bigfoot stories often discuss the Sasquatch having a distinctive odor. This is especially apparent with the southern equivalent of Bigfoot, whose distinct smell has earned it the nickname skunk ape. Mostly found in Florida, it's described as basically smelling like a mix between wet dog, rotten eggs, decaying corpses, and excrement. It just sounds lovely, doesn't it? Just a wonderful combination. In 1971, an electronics engineer, H.C. Osborne, was assisting a group looking for relics in the Big Cypress Swamp. The group had finished for the day and had gone to sleep. At 3 a.m., they began to hear noises outside of their tents. When they went out to investigate, they encountered a 7-foot-tall humanoid darting into the swamp. The next morning, they made casts of the footprints the creature left behind. Dave Shealy, a Florida resident, managed to capture several pictures and videos of the skunk ape. They're all available to watch on YouTube and the internet. I think it's a bit interesting to compare it to the Patterson-Gimlin film, because in the Patterson-Gimlin film, Bigfoot is just walking so slowly at a very leisure pace. But in the Dave Shealy videos of the skunk ape, the skunk ape is just power walking through the Everglades. Like, the Patterson-Gimlin film just looks like Bigfoot was taking a walk and happened to run into two of the cowboys, but the Dave Shealy film looks like skunk ape is actively trying to avoid Dave Shealy and just walk as far away from him as possible. Now, something that makes the skunk ape a bit more unique is that apparently it walks more like a traditional, I don't know why I said traditional, it walks more like a regular gorilla that we all know. Instead of walking on two legs, like most depictions of Bigfoot, it walks on its back legs as well as its front arms, kind of quadrupedally almost, using its knuckles. Now, just for fun, I think we're going to read some Reddit stories that I found. Obviously, it's the internet, so take everything you hear with a grain of salt. We're just going to be reading some of these and reacting to them, and if they offer any kind of supplemental information, we'll expand more on that. So, this is an audio-only show, but please feel free to put on some Minecraft or Subway Surfers gameplay footage while I read these out. So let's get into the first one. These are some responses to a post in the Bigfoot subreddit asking, what is the creepiest Bigfoot encounter you've ever heard of? The first comment reads, the one from Sasquatch Chronicles where a guy is telling a memory from his childhood, visiting his grandmother, and seeing the neighbor feeding something in the dark. The neighbor kept some caged animals like cats or something and fed them to two creatures that spider crawled from around the corner. They were two Bigfoots, a male and a female. Apparently that woman was feeding them often and the neighbors watched from the porch. Super creepy about the spider crawl. So basically, according to this account, the Sasquatches encountered here didn't walk on two legs. They spider crawl instead. I assume that means they walk on all fours and move slower like a gorilla. Although gorillas can move pretty fast. I'd honestly be more scared of the neighbor than the Sasquatches, if I think about it. Because I feel like a person who keeps house cats caged and feeds them to wild animals is infinitely more scary than a giant forest ape. But then again, it's probably smart to be scared of both, considering she's in a mutual relationship with these two Sasquatches. If you make her mad, she might send them to your house to mess you up or something. Honestly, though, maybe she was only feeding them as an offering to get them to leave her alone. I'm open to that possibility. Maybe we should just be scared of the Sasquatches. I don't know. We're going to move on to the next comment for that same post. This one simply reads, "The Sierra Sounds." I'll actually play an audio clip of this for you guys. These are supposed Bigfoot vocalizations that were recorded in 1970 in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Some key things to note before we start here. First of all, the person recording the Sierra Sounds is having a conversation, quote-unquote, with Bigfoot. So some of the noises you're going to hear are him impersonating the calls. You're going to want to listen to the more distant sounding vocalizations in the background. That's the supposed Bigfoot that's talking with him.
You're trying to talk to this. Like you're laughing now.
There's two of them across the creek at the big rocks. It's a hard act to follow.
It sounds like he talks to us and they talk to each other.
Yeah. Right there, I just seen movement right through there.
Now, I really think this is interesting, because first of all, the Sasquatch in that video, it sounds like a primate with the hoots and the other noises it's making, but we can also hear this almost phonetic spoken language coming from the Sasquatch. And I don't know why, but the idea of Bigfoot and of Sasquatches having this actual spoken language to communicate. That's actually a really cool concept to me. I would love to see some Bigfoot stories where they utilize that more, like having the Bigfoots have more of a connection with humans, like having a spoken language. I just really think that's a cool concept, and if this audio is real, then that just made Bigfoot about 5 times cooler to me. Now we're going to move on to the next comment of this post. This one reads, "We had a local family that reported watching a pair of subjects bending over and looking into a neighbor's windows. They also explored garbage cans. This happened on multiple occasions, and would be a few times in about a week period. A local investigator attempted to use cameras, but the pair was not seen again until the following year. It is likely that these two are a part of a group that traverse the area twice a year. They have been around for decades and have become nearly predictable. I believe they do a migration from one area to another seasonally. I'm not the only one with this belief. A few years ago, 5 individuals had been documented. As time passes, researcher attrition isn't helping, but it's pretty obvious what's going on, as there is a yearly pattern and has been for decades." So, according to this commenter, Sasquatches have some sort of migratory pattern. That actually does seem logically plausible, considering things like seasons and how much of a big difference a season can make on a area's climate in the United States. I can see a plausible explanation for the inconsistency in Bigfoot sightings and evidence and locations and survival even being dependent on what area it goes for the season. A lot of people say that Bigfoot shouldn't be able to exist because the forests that it's been located in don't have enough food to support their metabolisms, but I mean, if they migrate, they don't have to worry about that. So that is actually a very good theory and explanation. Like, maybe the Washington Sasquatches will come up here for the summer, but then when it gets cold, they go down to California for the winter. That sort of thing. The Patterson-Gimlin film, which was filmed in California, it was filmed in October, so that's usually when the months start getting colder, at least in Washington. That's all I'm gonna say. And yeah, most apes like gorillas and chimpanzees and orangutans don't migrate. But humans, we migrate based on seasons in this day and age, technically. I don't know if you consider vacations migration, but, I mean, very early on, humanity was a very nomadic, hunter-gatherer, kind of travel around everywhere species. So I will give this commenter credit. This actually does hold some ground. Alright, moving on to the next comment. This one mentions a 911 call that's played on the intro of various podcasts where the caller's dog went flying over the fence and was dead before it hit the ground. Alright, first of all, for the playing in the intro of podcasts, you've already heard this 911 call. I did in fact put it in the intro to my podcast. In my defense, I had the idea for that intro before I read that comment, and I do not remember listening to or watching anything that used that audio for the intro. So, you can call me basic, just don't call me a plagiarist. So now that my personal defense has been addressed, I'm now going to play some more excerpts from that call to just refresh some memories and take a more in-depth look at it.
911, what are you reporting? I got a strange going on out here. Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree. I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
I'm really confused. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence, and he was dead when she hit the ground. I didn't see any cars. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence.
911, what are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was? Was it a person or an animal, or?
I can't tell. All I know is that my central light came on, and I just happened to glimpse and see this thing running across the yard. A good-sized man, or something. It looks like a man. I don't know what it was, just that it ran across the yard.
Okay. You've had problems in the neighborhood before?
Yeah, my dog was killed here just recently. I don't know what it was. Whatever it is, it's running. I couldn't catch it if I was going to chase it, but whatever it was standing up. I'm out here looking through the window now, and I don't see anything. I don't want to go outside.
Sir?
Dia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That's about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now? now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh. Okay, hang on.
He's right.
Is he in your yard, sir?
Yeah, God, he's big.
Okay, what's he doing in your yard?
He's looking at me.
Oh, and the guy is on foot.
I don't know what. It's a big, real big person. That's all I can say.
Okay, but it is a person.
Yeah, I'd say it was a person, somebody really big. But he's all in black.
Is he a black male or a white male? Did you actually see whether, or was he just wearing black?
He's all black and he's big. He is big.
Now, this could have been a prank call, but I also feel like I can hear genuine terror in his voice at some parts. Either he's a really good actor, or he really did see something in his backyard. And if that was the case, and this really did happen, then I just want to say rest in peace to that dog. That does not sound like a fun way to go at all, getting chucked over a fence by Bigfoot. So those were all the responses to that post. We're going to move on to a different post now. Same subreddit, but this post asks, let's share the encounters that you think are the most believable. The first comment reads, the one that is seared in my mind is an audio clip I heard on the old BFRO Blue forum, or whatever it was called. There were a couple of guys who had parked on a forest road and were making calls. They start to hear something up the hill from them, and their demeanor changes, whispering, asking each other what they heard, etc. Then pretty quickly you hear something start making its way down the hill while snapping branches. It then charges down the hill at them, taking out what sounds like everything in its path. They jump into the vehicle, start it, and get out of there. There are a few things that really get me about this recording. The speed that everything changes. They go from lighthearted call blasting, almost joking, to instant terror and flight. You can clearly hear it in their voices. I get the feeling that I am listening to two individuals who truly are in fear for their lives. And the volume of this thing coming at them. You can hear it closing the distance very quickly. The power and ferocity really comes through in the recording. You can even still hear it coming at them for a bit, windows up through the glass, when they are tearing out of there. I remember just being in awe of what I was hearing when I first listened to it. It is a really good quality recording and paints the picture in your head of what's going on. I think about that one a few times a year, and I probably haven't heard it in at least a decade, but it still gives me chills. So once again, I'm just going to play the audio clip for you.
Might be coming up behind us. There he goes again. Mm-hmm. Go.
So I definitely agree with the commenter. This audio clip actually creeped me out quite a bit to listen to. It's never reassuring to hear something roaring in the distance, especially in a forest. And I can definitely hear the tone change that the commenter was talking about. This is definitely some good horror movie tier stuff right here. The next comment we're going to read says, my favorite, and I feel like it truly happened, was the Ape Canyon encounter. Looks like Fred Beck's got some fans of his own. So that was really it for that post. We're going to move on to the next post. This one asks, are there some encounter stories involving attack? A commenter shared this theory on Bigfoot behavior, stating that, I do think a big reason you don't hear of too many aggressive encounters in general is that these creatures have learned that harming or killing a person only brings more people into the area, often people with vengeance. I mean, just think about how many encounters involve a Bigfoot trying to scare someone out of an area. They'll throw rocks, shake trees, hoot and holler up a storm, and make a big display, but never touch you. In other words, I think it's an all or nothing type thing with them. The majority of them are well adjusted and smart enough to know that harming a human brings nothing but trouble, so they simply don't. But the unfortunate ones with a few screws loose, the ones that can't help but be aggressive, just outright kill. There's no in between, so you're not going to find very many instances of one just breaking a man's arm and letting them go. That's my guess anyway. So that very ominous comment, especially at the end there, basically theorizes that Sasquatches will really go out of their way to avoid physical confrontation and altercation with humans as a way of self-preservation, since, humans, especially the American variety of humans, love to carry guns around everywhere. Now, that being said, there might be one or two crazed ones out in the woods somewhere, so make sure to stay vigilant when you're on your hike or camping trip next time. The next comment on that post says, read up about the Bauman incident as told by U.S. President and overall BA Teddy Roosevelt. It's chilling, and by the way, I can't say the actual word used in the original comment, so do some deductive reasoning on what BA stands for. Also, the Battle of Ape Canyon involves a swarm of Bigfoots attacking a cabin. Now, once again, another shout out to the Ape Canyon encounter and Fred and his little posse. But what caught my attention, however, was that Teddy Roosevelt, as in 26th United States President Teddy Roosevelt, had documented an encounter with one of these things. For those of you who don't know, Teddy Roosevelt was a very passionate outdoorsman. He spent a lot of time in the wilderness of the American frontier and always had a very big connection with nature. And in the late 1800s, Roosevelt was writing a book called Memories of the American Frontier, in which he interviewed several individuals that lived in that region. In one account, an elderly trapper referred to as Bauman shared his story of a Bigfoot encounter with Roosevelt. So Roosevelt writes, frontiersmen are not, as a rule, to be very superstitious. They lead lives too hard and practical, and have too little imagination in things spiritual and supernatural. I have heard but few ghost stories while living on the frontier, and those few were of a perfectly commonplace and conventional type. But I once listened to a goblin story, which rather impressed me. A grizzled, weather-beaten old mountain hunter named Bauman, who, born and had passed all of his life on the frontier, told the story to me. He must have believed what he said, for he could hardly repress a shudder at certain points of the tale. But he was of German ancestry, and in childhood had doubtless been saturated with all kinds of ghosts and goblin lore. So that many fearsome superstitions were latent in his mind. Besides, he knew well the stories told by the Indian medicine men in their winter camps, of the snow walkers and the specters, the formless evil beings that haunt the forest depths, and dog and waylay the lonely wanderer who after nightfall passes through the regions where they lurk. It may be that when overcome by the horror of the fate that befell his friend, and when oppressed by the awful dread of the unknown, he grew to attribute, both at the time and still more in remembrance, weird and elfin traits to what was merely some abnormally wicked and cunning wild beast. But whether this was so or not, no man can say. Now you're probably wondering, what exactly did Bauman experience? Well, this is the part where I tell you. So, Bauman had told Roosevelt that while him and his hunting partner were out trapping beaver, they began noticing some oddities. When they returned from a long day of beaver trapping, they found their camp in complete disarray. In Roosevelt's book, he writes that they were surprised to find that during their absence, something, apparently a bear, had visited camp and had rummaged about their things, scattering the contents of their packs, and in sheer wantonness destroyed their lean-to. The footprints of the beast were quite plain, but at first they paid no particular heed to them, busying themselves with rebuilding the lean-to, laying out their beds and stores, and lighting the fire. So basically, the two thought that a bear had just gotten into their camp. But later that day, while making dinner, Bauman's partner discovered a series of footprints in the dirt nearby. He examined them before remarking, "Bauman, that bear has been walking on two legs." Bauman and his partner had began discussing if whether or not it was possible for a human to make those footprints, and after deciding that it wasn't, the two slept in the lean-to shelter they had constructed. At around midnight, Bauman began to hear noises, and woke up only to be met with a horrible smell across the camp. At the entrance to the shelter, he noticed a large creature standing in the doorway. Bauman grabbed his rifle and fired at the creature, causing it to dart off. The two men barely slept that night, and decided to continue their beaver trapping expedition. They spent the entire day keeping an eye on each other's safety before returning back to the camp at night. They came back to find the campsite completely ransacked, their shelter destroyed, and large humanoid footprints scattered all across the ground. That night, the men took turns keeping watch by the fire. Though they did hear the creature moving around and vocalizing nearby, it never directly interacted with them. In the morning, they agreed to pack their bags, collect and clean up the remaining traps, and head home. Although they initially thought they had collected everything, They realized they had left a few beaver traps behind in the nearby pond. Bauman volunteered to go and retrieve them, leaving his companion alone to finish cleaning up the campsite. When he got to the pond, he noticed that one of the beavers had escaped its trap. After catching and securing the beaver, Bauman began walking back to the camp in a hurry, noticing that they were behind schedule and the sun was beginning to go down. When he returned to the camp, Bauman could see that his companion had spent a productive day cleaning. The bags were packed and ready to go, and the fire had been put out. Bauman called out to his companion, only to get no response. He walked closer to the extinguished fire, where he found his companion lying completely lifeless next to it. His neck had been broken by something, and Bauman noticed large, human-like fingerprints across his neck. He also noticed deep bite marks in the throat. Now, Bauman's theory was that his companion had finished cleaning up the campsite and had decided to sit by the campfire to wait for his friend. With his back facing the woods, the man never saw the Sasquatch sneak up behind him before it grabbed him by the throat and attacked him. Bauman ran as far away as he could from the camp, and when he finally had access to the pony he had taken to get to the location, he rode off and never looked back. This is honestly kind of a sad story. I don't know how close Bauman was with this guy, his hunting companion, but it's probably never a happy experience to come across the dead body of someone you've spent a while working with. That being said, what was Bauman thinking, spending that much time trying to grab the last beaver? In the book, it mentions that he already caught 3 when he went to go retrieve those last traps in the pond, but he spent over an hour, trying to grab that last beaver out of its beaver dam. And I don't understand that, because if it was me personally, I wouldn't have even gone back for the traps. I would have just gotten out of there as soon as the sun comes up. As soon as that sun comes up, I would have just booked it out of there. Because I don't want to spend any amount of time remotely near that thing, especially when it knows you're there and goes out of its way to mess with your campsite. I don't know. Okay, look, I understand it was a different time, so maybe it wasn't as easy to just leave on a whim, or maybe they were in some kind of financial situation where they needed to get as many beavers as they possibly could, but I don't know. I would have personally left as soon as the sun came up. I would have just gotten out of there. Also, I'm kind of starting to notice a pattern in these stories from what either the Bowman story or the Ape Canyon incident. I'm starting to notice a pattern that shooting Bigfoot is a horrible idea, because usually shooting him means that either he's going to come back to kill you, in the case of Bowman's friend, or he's going to come back with his whole tribe of Bigfoots, like Ape Canyon, and just declare all-out war on you. So, don't shoot Bigfoot. Nature is not on your side, according to these 2 accounts, because Bigfoot will just come back to retaliate. The other thing that won't be on your side is the law. If you're in Washington State, at least. Because remember, it's a misdemeanor. So, just the moral of the story is, don't shoot Bigfoot if you see him. So as you can see, Bigfoot has become a nationwide phenomenon. These are just some of the stories people have shared. And if they're true, then the Sasquatch population seems to be pretty liberally dispersed across the United States, but found in concentration alongside the coastal areas. That's the main takeaway from these stories, is basically that Bigfoot is around 7 foot tall, usually dark hair, lives in high concentrations in coastal areas, but is scattered across the United States, albeit with possible different species like the skunk ape. I know I keep saying we'll talk about this later. I'm going to say it one more time. Keep in mind what I just said about them having dark hair and usually walking bipedally and being around 7 foot tall, because that is actually a pretty big point that we're going to touch on at the end of the episode when we discuss whether or not I think Bigfoot is legit or not. Before we talk about the arguments for and against Bigfoot's existence, let's talk about some more recent sightings. This is a segment of the show. It's going to basically work like a news report. I want to do a thing where whenever I talk about a cryptid and there's more recent sightings of it that have gone viral or something like that, or have been put into the public sphere, I want to cover those, because the book I'm using right now doesn't really talk about the more popular sightings that have gone viral on things like YouTube and TikTok and Instagram. because there have been a few notable Bigfoot sightings recently. Kind of. See, there was a video on TikTok that was going around for a bit and it went pretty viral. It was a Bigfoot sighting where a man stumbles across a Sasquatch eating some leaves in the forest. The Sasquatch in that video had orange fur and almost looks like an orangutan. Unfortunately, this video was debunked pretty early. It turns out that video was all just an ad campaign for a vape store, albeit appropriately titled Bigfoot Head Shop. There's also the infamous video taken from a train in Colorado of a Sasquatch walking along a hill before sitting down. That one is still being talked about. Some people think it's a hoax, others think it's real. As for me, all I'm gonna say is that the Bigfoot's fur in that video does look a little Chewbacca costume at Disneyland-esque. That's all I'm gonna say on the Colorado Bigfoot sighting. That's about it in terms of videos that have entered the mainstream. Obviously, there's hundreds of videos on YouTube of Bigfoot sightings, but in all honesty, I've tried watching some of them to talk about in this section, and nothing I've seen looks very convincing at all. It either looks like CGI, AI, or someone in a very obvious costume. Now, let's get into the main theories both for and against Bigfoot existing. The first argument is that it's a supernatural creature that has the ability to either turn invisible or go to a different dimension. That dimension thing specifically is a concept that Fred Beck, who had the encounter at Ape Canyon, talks about for the majority of his book. I didn't really mention it earlier, but a lot of his book is dedicated to explaining this magic system almost that the Sasquatches apparently have. I'm just going to read some excerpts and let you be the judge. In the true sense, everything in the material world is a manifestation. Ever since the time the first essence of consciousness formed the great void we cannot describe, different planes or dimensions of beings were created or manifested. Occasionally, we of this dimension of space can be conscious of other beings of a different vibration and consciousness. The abominable snowmen are from a lower plane. When the condition and vibration is at a certain frequency, they can easily, for a time, appear in a very solid body. They are not animal spirits, but also lack the intelligence of a human consciousness. When reading of evolution, we have read many times conjecture about the missing link between man and the anthropoid ape. The snowmen are a missing link in consciousness, neither animal or human. They are very close to our dimension, and yet are a part of one lower. Could they be the missing link that man has been searching so long for? When this age or cycle of life that we are in moves on eventually to a higher cycle, and all life moves forward, these beings may stay and move up in consciousness in some other world in the far distant future. Perhaps the ape beings will toil the road of intelligence in that world which none of us can even imagine, and perhaps they too will lose nothing and gain by their experience. They are the easiest beings materialized, as evidenced by many of the reports of their appearances to more people in recent years. In fact, if the vibratory influence right for them is present, they can manifest without any human being present at all. This accounts for the many tracks being seen alongside the mountain ranges of the West Coast and Canada. So, this may sound like something straight out of D&D, and it is pretty confusing initially with how it's written, but I think after reading it over a few times, I have a basic summary. So, Beck believes that the reason there is barely any physical evidence for a Sasquatch is because Sasquatches aren't real. Well, technically, according to Beck, they are real, but they also aren't. See, Beck believes that Sasquatches come from a different dimension. We're going to call it Sasquatch World. Now, they don't exist in our current one. However, because they're so closely related to humans, and they're such simple, primal creatures, according to Beck, when a human is in an environment that makes them go into a more primal, simple state, like, say, camping, hunting, or hiking, there's a chance that we basically form this spiritual connection with Sasquatch World and its inhabitants that allow them to temporarily travel to this dimension. Beck states the reason why Sasquatches can enter our world but we can't go to Sasquatch World is because we're more spiritually evolved as a species, as well as physically, which means that only we have the power to bring things into our world through manifestation. I will give Beck credit for at least trying to explain why evidence, tangible physical evidence for Bigfoot is so few and far between. And I think he's also trying to explain the spirits he encountered with his whole spiritual manifestation explanation. I think he believes that spirits run on the same logic where they can travel from their dimension to our dimension if you manifest hard enough. It's definitely a lot less scientific of an explanation than the other proposed ones I'm about to give, but regardless, Bigfoot being some sort of supernatural or interdimensional being is something that's entered the mainstream in terms of arguments for its existence. Now, the other more scientific theory is that Bigfoot isn't really supernatural or anything like that, and that it's some sort of undiscovered primate that resides in North America. The Gigantopithecus is one that gets brought up a lot when it comes to the exact species of Bigfoot. The Gigantopithecus is an extinct great ape that measured likely around 12 feet tall, a little taller than the average 7 feet described in most sightings. The logic behind this argument is that if the coelacanth, which was a species of fish that was thought to have gone extinct around 65 million years ago, ends up being rediscovered, well, it did end up being rediscovered. So if the coelacanth could be rediscovered, then the same could be possible for the Gigantopithecus, which we now know as Bigfoot, according to people who hold this view. Aside from the Gigantopithecus, Sasquatches have also been considered to just be some sort of proto-human, like Neanderthals or Homo sapiens that never fully evolved out. Now, for the arguments against Bigfoot, there are some notable ones. The first one is mistaking animals, mainly bears, for Sasquatches. A lot of reported sightings note that Bigfoot always has black or sometimes brown hair, and the West Coast, somewhere with a pretty big density in Sasquatch sightings, also happens to have a good concentration of bears of both fur colors. Additionally, the Sasquatches encountered in the stories I've read have almost all been 7 feet tall. When I Google how tall is a black bear standing up, I get black bears are usually about 3 feet tall at the shoulder when standing on all fours, and up to 7 feet tall when standing upright on two legs. So Sasquatch is 7 feet tall. A black bear standing on its hind legs also happens to be 7 feet tall. Just food for thought. Now, the other and probably least fun explanation is that Bigfoot is simply a hoax made up by people. At the end of the day, most evidence we have is just verbal accounts with very little tangible physical evidence, aside from some plaster-casted footprints. When there is evidence, it's chalked up to either being a guy in a gorilla suit, if it's video footage or pictures, or the footprints being made using wooden templates, or just straight-up lies. In 2002, Philip Morris, head of Morris Costumes in North Carolina, claims that he helped make the costume used to film the infamous Patterson-Gimlin film. Okay, so now we're going to talk about whether or not I think Bigfoot is real. And, okay, in all honesty, I would personally not be surprised if they confirmed its existence and that it was real. But I really feel like the majority of the stories I've heard have pretty convincing counter-arguments. First of all, Fred Beck's account is, at the end of the day, only words. The only real evidence we will ever have is to just take his word for it. The Patterson-Gimlin film is pretty convincing. However, it was made in the 60s, not the 20s, so Bigfoot was relatively known of at that point, and technology and special effects had greatly increased since then. I've tried looking over it multiple times to see if I can catch anything that looks fake, and while I really can't, I also couldn't find anything that makes it seem real. What I mean by that is, it looks like a living creature. It doesn't look like a puppet, it doesn't look like CGI, it looks like something that is alive and moving on its own accord. However, a human in a gorilla suit is also alive and moving on its own accord. So, it looks like it could either just be a guy in a costume or a real living creature. I don't know. I genuinely am of the opinion that it could be either, at least for the Patterson-Gimlin film. The first human who Paul ran into right after his Bigfoot encounter was a police officer who caught him speeding. Sure, there's a chance he really did see a Sasquatch, but it also feels like there's a chance that he could have just made up the story to get out of a speeding ticket and just happened to pull off a convincing enough job to where he scared the local population into forming a search party. The only other person who had a direct encounter with it was a direct member of Paul's family. The point is, there is an equal amount of evidence in my eyes that are both in favor of Bigfoot's existence as well as against its existence. I think the only real way to figure out if Bigfoot is real is to just go out in the middle of the woods, maybe camp overnight, and just look. I am actually considering going over to Ape Canyon, or like the Mount St. Helens area, for a weekend. Not this weekend or even next weekend. This is going to be in the future. But I was thinking of heading over there to maybe do a special episode where I recount anything I see and just the overall experience. Try to get a story of my own to share. Potentially. We'll see. Hopefully it works. I want this to happen. I want it to work. As of right now, though, I'm not promising anything because of just life. However, I really do want it to happen, and it would really be fun. So I'm going to try to start putting together the inklings of a plan. I think what I would do, and this is just a very basic plan so far, I would head out there, I would go on a hike during the day, just kind of... I don't know if I'd really actively search for anything. I don't really want to start tearing up the forest looking for Bigfoot, but I would probably just do a hike during the day, maybe go on some less used trails, see if I run into anything, and then just head back to the campsite at night, try to listen for anything, see if I can catch anything on video. It would probably just be that for a weekend. And so, with that, I think this is where the episode begins wrapping up. If you guys have any stories or anything you'd like to share, please feel free to email me again, jruckman27@mywhitworth.edu. Thank you all for tuning in to listen. I hope you guys have a great night, and join us next time when we take a look at what else is out there.